Hi there. Thanks for joining me. I'm Jane Farish, and I'm working today from my home in North Carolina. And I have quite a few things I want to share with you today. So I'm going to get started with thanking you for joining me. And I really appreciate all the comments that were left on my first video. I have always been a little bit camera shy, and I was very nervous about doing the first one, and I think that I'll get more comfortable as we go along. But I just need to tell you that I really do appreciate your encouragement. And I also had all kinds of interesting comments, specific questions and whatnot, and I will try to answer them as I go along today and in other videos as well. Let's see. First of all, I had a good question from Sarah, who asked about the Victorian Cross and what happens when you want to go in the other direction. I explained last week that you work this from right to left. So, and you're doing complete cross stitches. So when you get to the other side, when you get to the left side, then how do you get back to the other side? Well, what I generally do is just to turn my work upside down. And as long as you're turning it 180 degrees, then your crosses will still be going in the same direction. So I hope that that clarifies that question. I thought it was amazing how many people already do the Victorian Cross. They just didn't know what it was called. And that's great. As I said last week, I am all about education and teaching and sharing. And so I am pleased that so many of you were able to connect a name with what you've been doing all along. I also had a good question from Lisa, who said that she was working on a project that was all about flags with lots of stripes and wondered whether or not the Victorian Cross would be good for that type of project. And my answer is a resounding yes. That is the perfect application for the Victorian Cross, in my opinion. And so I hope that anyone who's doing anything with stripes will find it helpful. It was also really nice to hear from so many people who have taken classes with me in shops all around the country or at retreats and gatherings and on the recent cruises. And it was really nice to hear from friends from near and far and from a few months ago or from a few years ago. And it's just really, really nice to be connecting with so many people who have taken classes with me. So let me think. The next thing I wanted to talk about is a work in progress for that America Land That We Love project. And I really got more done this week than I thought I would with other things that I had to do. I finished the Wisconsin block, and I started the bottom banner, and I just wanted to kind of do a close-up here, if I can get my camera angle in here right. So what I have done here is after finishing this row, this blank area here, and one on the other side as well, is where the chart includes a space for personalization for your name and when you started it or finished it or whatever. And I'm actually thinking about making an adaptation from the original for those areas. So I'm going to skip that for right now. But last week I got Wisconsin finished. I did make a slight change. I thought that the pink that I called for the udder in the original was just way too bright, and so I quieted that color just a little bit, and I put a note on the Facebook group. We do have a Facebook group that's a stitch along for this project, and so I made a note there, and I will be making a note when I publish the next edition. And then I decided to go ahead and start this bottom banner, and I did that for two reasons. One is because I had some time to stitch when I couldn't give the project my full attention, and so that was the perfect time to work on just these straight lines. And again, the Victorian Cross was perfect because I started over here and worked this row from right to left, and then I came down and then turned my project upside down to again be working from right to left, but upside down. And again, as long as you turn your cross stitch projects a full 180 degrees, then your uppermost cross will always be going in the same direction. So that's what I got done this week, and also started in the red that's going to read Land That We Love across here. And so that's my work in progress here. Oh, by the way, it was also great to hear from so many people who are working on this project now or who have stitched it in the past. And that's just great. If you have the time, I would really appreciate it if you would post a photo of how you ended up finishing it, whether you did it as a quilt hanging or framed it or whatever. And even if you have the stitching finished, but you haven't what we call finally finished it, it would just be really great to hear from you. And again, Facebook is a wonderful, it's one of the best functions I think for Facebook is the sharing of photos of our projects, either in progress or when the stitching is finished. Before I change the subject entirely here, I want to talk a little bit about how stitchers feel about and how they work on their projects in terms of what the back looks like. I don't think there's any stitching element that brings out stronger feelings than when people talk about what the back of their work looks like. Now, I want to preface my next part of my statements here with this, and that is, I think that whatever time and effort and expertise that people put into their stitching is great. That's like the golden rule. Beyond that, how you approach your work is a very, very personal decision. Some people do it completely for relaxation. They don't, frankly, care what it looks like. They don't care what other people think about their work. And that is fine. And that needs to be fine with everybody. On the other, if you want to think about this as like a scale or a spectrum, on the far end of that are people who are constantly striving for perfection. They enter their work in local, state, and even national competitions, and they are very aware of the standards that judges apply to what we do. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle. I certainly put myself somewhere in the middle. I am not a competitive stitcher. But also, before I go any further, I also want to make it clear, wherever you are on that spectrum is fine. If you are the most competitive stitcher in the whole wide world, that's okay. And I think that I am bothered by comments on Facebook posts where people make judgments about stitchers regarding where they fall on that spectrum. And I want to encourage you, as part of a stitching community, to just stop doing that. If you feel like a person's being too persnickety, scroll on by. If you think they're not being persnickety enough, scroll on by. Because anytime somebody takes the joy of stitching away from a stitcher, I am bothered by that. And I think that we all have a responsibility in a stitching community to be gracious and kind and tolerant to our stitching friends. With that said, I want to now talk about what the back looks like. And I have absolutely no problem sharing what the back of my work looks like. So let me get camera set up here so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so one of the things that is constantly said, again, in forums like Facebook groups and whatnot, are people who feel like that all of your stitches need to be going straight up and down on the back. And you'll see that when I did my border up here, my stitches are straight up and down. Let me see if I can get in closer here. Later, when I started working using the Victorian Cross, you'll start seeing where, okay, here's a really good example. Let me back up here for a second here. Okay, so here I have done, I've done this row in the traditional way where I did a half cross over, a half cross back. And when you do that, your stitches are going to be straight up and down on the back. Right below that, let me see, am I in the right place here? Right below that, I can tell that this row was done with a Victorian Cross. And it's like I can tell, like, once I finished, this is New Jersey here, I can tell, even though it's backwards. This is when I switched and started using the Victorian Cross in my horizontal rows. And therefore, I don't have straight up and down stitches on the back. So that's one thing I do want to make clear. Having your stitches straight up and down the back is not a standard for good cross stitch. It just isn't. Now, one of the things I think that does make a difference is one of the things you won't see in my work are long straggly threads. And when I see that in people's work, I make no comment about it. However, when I'm teaching, one of the things I do stress is that it is important when you have secured your stitching thread on the back that you then clip off your stitching thread, what I call dangerously close. In other words, I don't leave a half of an inch. I don't leave a quarter of an inch. I certainly don't leave a couple of inches of work, of thread on the back. And again, in a class situation where people are striving to learn something new or to improve their technique, I'm a little bit more comfortable asking questions. And one of the questions I ask is, why do you leave the tail on the back of your work? And invariably the answer is, I want to make sure that my stitches don't come undone. If you are concerned that your stitches are going to come undone on the back, that is a clue that you need to tunnel under, slip your working thread under more stitches on the back. Once it is secure, having that extra tail is not going to make your stitches more secure. All it's going to do is to create chaos on the back. And although it is easy to say, no one sees the back, what you do invariably see is that when you're stitching on the front, these loose threads are too easily caught by your stitching in some other area of the work. And it's kind of hard to demonstrate. It's kind of hard to explain this with words and not demonstrate it. So if you have these tails on the back that are loose, then what happens as you're stitching, your needle catches it and pulls it to the front. I have seen people, let's say, let me use the most extreme example. Let's say if you're doing a snowman with a red scarf and you're stitching the white and suddenly you have this little red tuft coming up in the middle of the snowman's belly. And you say, where did that come from? Where it came from is the 1/2-inch tail of the red thread that you left on the back. So there's a reason that I stress that. It's not to make your back pretty. It's because what's going on in the back of your work does have an impact of what's going on in the front of your work. The other reason that a neat back becomes important is that when you have these threads, or when you are carrying a stitching thread from one area to another without burying it, in other words, you're just carrying it across the back, that can end up showing on the front of your work. And although I don't have any samples handy, I'll see if maybe next week or one of the coming weeks I can find a sample of my own work where I was careless, or maybe I should be kinder to myself and say I did not take my usual care. And invariably, that is what's going to show on the front. And to me, there's a Murphy's Law at work here that says the more you pay for a framing job, the more likely it is that a goof is going to show. So it's just really, really important to take that time with your work. And again, it's not a matter of being critical of beginners. We were all beginners at some point. We all started knowing nothing about this craft. And whether you learned it from an expert or you taught yourself, we all started with no knowledge and no experience. And so it is fine to not know what you're doing. It is fine to say, oh, I can improve on that. And it's also okay to say, you know what? I don't feel like improving. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, again, this is just my opinion, it's important that you take joy in your needlework. And speaking of teaching, I don't have another in-person class scheduled until May of 2021. And I am really excited about that, not only because it's just wonderful to look forward to having a face-to-face experience with stitchers. It's going to be on a cruise. It's on the Stitchers Escapes cruise from Vancouver, British Columbia, and then we're sailing north to explore Alaska. And this will be the second time that we've done a cruise to Alaska. I am just absolutely enchanted with Alaska and the amazing scenery that we encounter. And I am hoping that you'll join us. We do still have plenty of space for stitchers, as well as their non-stitching family, friends, whoever your travel buddy is. That person does not have to be a stitcher. So I have not decided what classes I'm going to be teaching yet. I will be designing a sampler that will be unique to the cruise. This is the one that I did for the 2019 cruise to Alaska. And I will be doing another one for the 2021 cruise. Beyond that, I haven't decided on my classes yet. I'm hoping to be able to announce that next week. I can tell you that Tony Gerardis will be sailing with us. Tony is very well known in the needlepoint community. She is one of the absolute best teachers I have ever encountered. She's gracious and charming and funny and warm, and she knows her stuff. And that these are all things that, as far as I'm concerned, really make a great teacher. And for those of you who consider yourself cross-stitchers and not needle pointers, I really would encourage you to open your horizons and think of canvas as simply a larger and coarser linen, for example. And so Tony's project that she's going to be teaching, called Fire and Ice, is a counted canvas piece. She will draw shapes on a canvas that you then fill in with stitches that she's teaching. And it's just an absolute gorgeous, gorgeous piece. And frankly, it's the second time that Tony has sailed with us. She was on our 2018 cruise and taught a companion piece called Abyss. And people just really loved having Tony as a teacher. So that's what's coming up. We're going to sail out of Vancouver, British Columbia, and going up through what they call the Inside Passage to Icy Strait, and then on to Juneau and Ketchikan. And by the way, Juneau has an incredible needlework store that we enjoyed immensely on our 2018 cruise, and we're planning to go back again. And we have excursions that are for our group, and we have onboard classes, and just, it's fun. And I think that one of the best things for people is that you're completely surrounded in this group of other people who do needlework. And so if you feel like you're sort of a solitary stitcher, that you don't have a close community of stitchers where you live, then it's especially valuable, because you find yourself in sort of like this little bubble that's just all about needlework, and it's refreshing, and it's fun, and it's rewarding. And at any rate, I mean, I think it's great, but then again, I'm the organizer, so don't take my word for it. But we get lots of good feedback from people that they enjoy it, and so I think that you would too. One of the most common questions I hear from beginners as well as intermediate stitchers is how to figure out how big to cut a piece of fabric for a particular project. And although it's pretty simple to do, it does seem to, intimidate or scare or perplex so many people. So I want to break that down today into a couple of very, very simple steps. And what I'm going to do is to use the project that I showed you last week, my work in progress here of Lady Virginia's garden, which I'm going to be teaching online in September. And in preparation for that, I need to stitch a second sampler. I need to stitch a second sample. So I'm going to be stitching it on the same fabric. And in case you're wondering, well, why is she stitching a second one? Let me back up for a second. When I taught the online classes for the previous design in this series, Lady Catherine's garden, I realized that I really needed two samples to work with. One would be my actual finished sample, which I would use for the photograph for the publication, and the other was that I needed to have so I could actually demonstrate it in the videos. So that's why I'm going to be stitching a second sample here. So it's the same type of linen. So this will give me the opportunity to maybe go through the steps of how to get started on a project, which may help you. Even if some small hint that I give you here helps you, that's great. And also, let me say that even if you know all this, it's kind of a good review. And especially if you're going to help somebody else who's learning, you can kind of say, okay, here are the steps that you need to take. Okay, so what do you need to know before you can even think about what size fabric you need to cut? The first thing is, what is the stitches per inch for that particular project? Now, that varies widely. I have done projects where I have stitched, say, 9 stitches per inch, 6 stitches per inch. The finest that I have done has been 15 or 16 stitches per inch. Now, there are people who stitch on much, much finer fabrics, and hats off to them. I have not ventured in that direction myself. But again, that's just all a matter of personal preference. But it's an important thing to know before you start. So I'm going to tell you some cautionary tales that you can benefit from, that are tragedies that other stitchers have encountered. The first thing is, unless you are 100% certain what the count is for the fabric that you are using, check that first. Do not go by what the package says. I wouldn't go by what anybody else says, because if it ends up being wrong, it can impact your project. And the worst way it impacts is that you don't have a piece of fabric that's big enough for your design, and you don't find out until you have gotten a considerable amount already stitched. So how do I know that? How do I figure that out? So let me use the existing one to show you how you figure it out. And that's simply to grab a ruler and count. So I'm going to look and see how many stitches I have in an inch. So I have, so here's my inch. Can you see that one here? This is a, also here's a good point to say, be careful what you're using to measure with, because if it's not an accurate rule, then you're not going to get accurate results. And if it's a small project, it isn't really going to matter. But if it's a large project, even if it's off a little bit, that little bit becomes a big bit the further you go. So in my 1 inch mark, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 stitches. And that is what I expected. Now, that's going in this direction. How about in the other direction? So again, lining this up with 1 inch, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 stitches. So this is pretty accurate. There are linens on the market that are deliberately uneven weaves, and people who do sampler reproductions covet those linens. Do not for a second think that there's something wrong with those fabrics. It is simply satisfying a different part of the market. Okay, now that I've determined that I've got 15 stitches per inch, that's a big part of this whole process. Now, let me also say that this is 30 count linen, and I'm stitching over 2, and that's how I anticipated it being 15 stitches per inch. But even so, I double checked. If I were stitching on 28 count linen over 2, I would be getting 14 stitches per inch. If I was working on 36 count linen, I would be getting 18 stitches per inch if I'm working over 2. So besides determining what fabric I'm working with, you also need to know, am I stitching over 1 or am I stitching over 2? So now that we have those 2 steps taken care of for this project, I know I have 15 stitches per inch, and I know that I'm stitching over 2. So the next thing I have to figure out is, what am I going to do with the finished project? Am I making it into a pillow? Am I going to frame it? Am I going to be using a mat? And these are all things that will impact how much extra fabric I want to have. And I'm going to get more into framing in a later video. Again, I'm trying to keep these fairly short so that, yeah, I'm just trying to keep them short. So I feel like there's like an encyclopedia's worth of information I want to share with you, and I want to put it in like 1 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, double spaced, 14 font typeface. So just be patient with me. I'll get to these other subjects later on. So when we talk about how much extra you want, so in this particular project, I have almost 3 inches from the edge to my design in both directions. And somehow an extra 3 inches has become like the gold standard of needlework. And I just want to tell you, that's a myth I am happy to bust. There are times that you'll want more than 3 inches, and there are times that you need much less than 3 inches. So if I were going to take this design and make it into a pillow, and if I were going to be adding fabric, let's say if I was going to leave about 1 inch around the edges and then adding fabric all around it to make it into a larger pillow, I would only need 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches of extra fabric around. I wouldn't need 3 inches. I would need the inch that I planned on showing, and I would need my seam allowance, and that's it. So please just take that you have to have 3 inches and just say, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It is important to know how much extra you want. So let's not, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You do need to know that. Just don't be stuck on the 3 inches. Because frankly, like everybody else, I live with a budget. And when you're talking about a large piece, if you even have 1 inch extra all the way around on all 4 sides, and let's say it's a really, really big sampler or something, you're talking about a lot of money that you have just wasted. That's just going to be cut away and will end up in the trash can, or as my friends in the UK say, it'll end up in the bin. So just be aware of that. And okay, I didn't so much lose my train of thought there as I'm trying to think what's the nicest way to say what I want to say here. So now that I've determined how much extra I want, now there's some very, very simple math that you need to do. I find that the easiest thing to do is to simply write it down. I take my design stitches across, I divide that by my fabric stitches per inch, and that's going to give me the width of the stitched area. This design is 93 stitches across. I just figured out that my fabric is going to give me 15 stitches per inch. So I'm taking 93, dividing it by 15, and I'm going to get 6.2 inches wide. And I'm going to round that off to 6.25 inches. The same design, 93 stitches across, hasn't changed. But if I'm working on fabric that's giving me 14 stitches per inch, I'm going to end up with a stitched width of 6.64 inches. So again, to simplify, let's round that off to 6.75 inches wide. Same design, 93 stitches across. If I'm working on 18 count fabric, I divide the 93 by 18, and that's going to equal 5.17, and I'm going to simplify that to 5.25 inches. Again, this is simply giving me the width of the stitched area. It's not counting any extra fabric for space between, say, the design and the frame. It's not allowing anything for the fabric to be wrapped around the foam core when it's being framed. If I were making it into a pillow, it's not allowing for seam allowance. So that's the next step. I know that my fabric is giving me 15 stitches per inch, so I'm going to use that 6.25 figure to determine exactly how wide I need to cut my fabric. This is the width, so it's 6.25 inches. In this case, I am going to add the 3 inches on both sides. So I've got 3 plus 6 1/4 plus 3. And actually, to simplify it, why don't we just say 6 inches plus 6 1/4 inches is going to give me 12 1/4 inches. And that's how wide my fabric needs to be. If I have a different stitch count for the length, then I go through the same steps to figure out what that figure is going to be. But for my Lady Virginia project, the design is square, so I can simply cut my fabric 12 1/4 inches square. And yes, I know that there are calculators out there on many websites, but again, if there's a mistake somewhere in that calculator of how it's set up, there's some little glitch, it's not the person who programmed it that's going to be ripping out. It's not the person who programmed it who's going to be crying real tears when they don't have enough fabric. It's going to be you. So learn how to do it yourself. It really isn't that hard, and it's just a good tool to have in your stitching tool belt. So again, you're going to take the number of stitches in the design, 93. I divided it by 15 and came up with a 6 1/4. I then take the 6 1/4 and I'm adding the 3 inches on either side. So 6 1/4 plus 6, 12 1/4. So for this design, if I cut this fabric exactly 12 1/4 inches square, I would have exactly 3 inches all the way around. I hope I have this centered right, because what I want to do is introduce you to Miss Jane Hattersley, who stitched this when she was 10 years old, finishing it on April 9th in 1832. I bought this at auction last summer, and I am really excited that I'm finally getting around to getting Miss Jane charted and ready for publication. This was a fundraiser auction for Salem Academy and College, which is right here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Salem Academy is the longest continuously run school for girls in the country. Founded in, I should know this by heart, 1772, and by the Moravians at Salem, North Carolina, a place that if you're an Outlander fan, you have seen in the series and certainly read about it in the books. Salem is where Jamie goes to buy rifles from the gunsmith in Salem, and Salem Academy was where the young girls got their education, which was pretty unusual for 1772. So Jane is especially important to me for those reasons. Now, I'm working on charting it right now, and I want to figure out how I can show you what that process is like, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. But what I do want to share with you is color choices. And this is always a big question in doing reproduction samplers, is trying to ascertain the colors. Now, I have not taken this out of the frame in which it was presented to me. I really don't know how long it's been framed like that. And once I get the chart done, then my next step will be to take it to an excellent local framer, and we will take it apart and see what kind of shape it's actually in. And I will decide how to reframe it, not just for my own personal pleasure, but also for publication. So one of the questions is, where do you get the colors from? Sometimes when you unframe it, you'll find that on the back the colors are much more vibrant because they haven't been exposed to sunlight over the years. So I'll be very curious to see that. But for right now, I am picking the colors based on what it looks like on the face of it. And to do that, I think I better just grab Jane again for just a second. Now, of course, it's under glass, and so we're getting a little bit of glare here. But surprisingly, Jane only has 7 colors in it. 2 grays that are kind of in the silvery gray family, a very bright, vibrant red, a taupe color, and a sort of orchid pink, as well as a sort of light terracotta color. So, okay, so this is what I've decided on. I have the 2 sort of silvery grays and the nice vibrant red, kind of an olive green, the taupe color, the terracotta, and the sort of orchid pink. And I guess I should turn this around here so you can see the numbers if you're interested. And by the way, this is Cosmo brand floss. It is manufactured in Japan, and I'm absolutely a big fan of Cosmo floss. The quality is superb. It's a lot more expensive than DMC or other flosses that you find, but it's the one that I enjoy stitching with the most. And I'm going to be stitching it on this 30 count linen. This is one of the legacy linens, and this is pecan shortbread. So I am really excited about getting it started. Okay, so I shared with you the colors that match the sampler as closely as possible. But what if Jane had more choices than she had at that time? Remember that young girls who stitched, and ladies of any age, were limited by the supplies that were available to them, just as we're limited by the supplies that are available to us. So what if she had more choices? So I thought to myself, well, what would be another way of doing the sampler? And this is what I came up with. If I just change the red a little bit, just brightened it up just a little bit, brightened up the green just a little bit, and stitched it on a sort of not white and not ivory. It's probably showing up a little bit whiter on the screen here than it is in real life. And then kept with the silvery gray, warmed up the other gray just a little bit, lightened up the taupe just a tad, changed the terracotta to more of a peach, and brightened up the orchid just a little bit. So I'm going to actually stitch this twice. I'm going to stitch it in the original colors as well as in the kind of adaptation colors, and just see what it's like. Which kind of brings me to another question that often comes up, and that is it okay to change the colors in a design? And I just want to tell you, from me, that's a great, big, huge yes. So I have a lot of stitching ahead of me this week. I want to work on my America Land That We Love project. I definitely need to get started on doing that framework for Lady Virginia's summer garden, so that I can get started on making my online videos for that project. And of course, I cannot wait to start stitching Jane Hattersley, and it's going to be a tough choice as to which of these 2 color schemes I start with. I have a feeling I'm going to be doing a little bit of both. So that's a wrap for me for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you'll subscribe. And by the way, I'm going to, at the end of this, on the screen, I'll put my email address as well as the web address for the cruise that we're going to be, that we're organizing for next May, that Tony Gerardis and I will be teaching on. And we do limit our cruises to 100 people. We feel like that much bigger than that, it's hard to have one-on-one connections with everybody that's in the group. So if you are interested in looking at the fairs and the other information, that's going to be on the screen at the end of this as well. So I hope you have a great week. Stitch happy and stay safe.